Every war needs a spark. This one started with an apple. Bronze Age Greece, a world of kings, warriors, and gods who couldn't stop meddling. It begins with a wedding and an uninvited guest. The goddess of discord wasn't on the guest list, so she crashed it with a gift. One apple, 3 goddesses, 0 chance this ends well. Naturally, they needed a judge, and they picked the worst possible man for the job. Meet Paris, a shepherd prince minding his own business on a quiet hillside, until 3 goddesses showed up and asked him to pick the prettiest. Each one offered him a bribe, power, victory in war, or the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris chose love. The other 2 goddesses did not take it well. 2 furious goddesses, and 1 broken promise waiting to happen. Onward. The promised woman had a small problem. She was already married. Helen, wife of King Menelaus of Sparta, famously the face that launched 1,000 ships. The goddess of love kept her promise. Whether Helen had a say in it is still argued today. One night, while Menelaus was away, Paris and Helen simply left. Sparta woke up 1 king short of a wife. And that is how you start a 10-year war. Menelaus wasn't just heartbroken. He was owed something. Years earlier, every one of Helen's suitors swore an oath. Whoever she married, the rest would defend that marriage. So the call went out across Greece. Every king who swore that oath now had to answer it. One of the kings tried to hide from the war entirely. The greatest warrior alive, Achilles. A clever king named Odysseus saw through the disguise in about 5 seconds. The Greeks had their army. Now they just needed 1,000 ships. They said 1,000 ships. Historians have argued about the exact number for centuries. Nobody argues it was small. Agamemnon, Menelaus's brother, took command of the whole expedition. Achilles brought his own elite fighters, fast, brutal, and loyal only to him. Other legendary fighters joined too, the giant Ajax and the fearless Diomedes. And with that, the largest army Greece had ever assembled set sail for one city. Troy had no idea what was coming. Troy, a walled city on the edge of Asia Minor, rich, proud, and heavily fortified. King Priam had ruled Troy for decades. He'd never seen an army this size at his gates. His son Hector was Troy's greatest defender, disciplined, respected, and about to be very, very busy. The first clash happened right on the sand, before either side had even set up camp. Neither army broke, and so began a siege that would last a lot longer than anyone expected. 10 years longer, to be exact. Most wars end fast. This one just didn't. 9 years of skirmishes, raids, and a whole lot of waiting outside a very sturdy wall. To keep supplies flowing, Achilles raided towns allied with Troy and took prisoners as spoils of war. One of those captives, a woman named Briseis, would end up at the center of the whole war's biggest argument, every single time. Troy's walls held, and then the Greeks did something far more dangerous than attack the walls. They turned on each other. The gods weren't just watching this war. Several of them were playing favorites. Some backed the Greeks, still bitter about that whole golden apple incident. Others quietly protected Troy, nudging spears off course and covering retreats in mist. According to legend, the gods argued over this war almost as much as the humans did. One rule stayed firm the whole time. The gods could nudge, but the humans had to fight it themselves. Divine meddling aside, back on the ground, the years kept grinding on. Agamemnon had to give up a captive of his own to end a plague on the army, and he wanted a replacement. He took Briseis straight out of Achilles' tent as compensation. For Achilles, this wasn't about the woman. It was about respect, and Agamemnon had just publicly humiliated him. So the greatest warrior in the Greek army made a decision. He simply stopped fighting. His entire elite unit sat out the war right along with him, which was fine until the Greeks found out exactly how much they needed him. With Achilles sidelined, Hector saw his opening, and he took it. Troy pushed the Greeks all the way back to their own ships for the first time in years. Agamemnon swallowed his pride and sent an offer. Gifts, apologies, anything Achilles wanted. Achilles said no, every single time. Without him, Troy was winning, badly. But someone close to Achilles couldn't stand to watch anymore. Years into the siege, both sides tried something simple. Let the two men actually responsible for this settle it themselves. Menelaus versus Paris. Winner keeps Helen. War over. Simple, right? Menelaus was winning, badly. Paris was seconds from ending the entire war right there. And then, conveniently, the goddess of love scooped Paris away in a cloud of mist. 1 second he was losing badly, the next he'd simply vanished. So much for the easy ending. Back to 10 years of war. Patroclus, Achilles' closest companion, couldn't watch their friends die anymore. If you won't fight, he begged Achilles, at least let me wear your armor and scare them off. On one condition, drive them back. Achilles agreed. Don't chase them to the walls. In Achilles' armor, Patroclus looked like the real thing, and the Trojans believed it. Terrified that Achilles had returned, the Trojan line broke and ran. One condition. He should have listened to just the one condition. Carried away by the victory, Patroclus chased the Trojans straight to their gates, and that's where Hector was waiting. They fought hard, but Hector had the walls, the momentum, and home advantage. Patroclus fell, and as his helmet rolled free, the trick was revealed. Hector took Achilles' armor as a war prize, not realizing exactly what he'd just started. Somewhere in the Greek camp, a message was about to break the greatest warrior alive. When Achilles heard Patroclus was dead, something in him broke. Grief, then something colder and far more dangerous. His mother had new armor made for him, unstoppable, gleaming, built for one purpose. Achilles wasn't fighting for Greece anymore. He wasn't even fighting for the war. He was fighting for revenge, and every Trojan on that field could feel the difference. There was only one man he wanted. Hector chose to stand and face him, even as his own father begged him to come inside. Two of the greatest warriors of the age, face to face, with a war's worth of grief between them. Even Hector hesitated, if only for a moment. Then he turned and chose to fight rather than run. It didn't take long. Achilles' rage found its mark. Hector, Troy's greatest defender, was gone, and Achilles wasn't finished. In his fury, Achilles refused Hector even the dignity of burial, dragging his body for all of Troy to see. Priam watched his son's body dragged through the dust night after night. Eventually, the old king did something no one expected. He walked into the enemy camp alone. He knelt before the man who killed his son and begged for the body back. And for a moment, Achilles remembered his own father. He agreed. Hector was given a proper funeral, but the war itself was far from over. Troy wasn't fighting alone either. Allied kingdoms sent warriors of their own. Reinforcements poured in from across the region to help defend the city. Hector welcomed every extra spear he could get. With fresh troops, Troy's push against the weakened Greek lines hit even harder. For a while, it genuinely looked like Troy might win this war outright, which is exactly why Achilles' absence was starting to feel like a 5-alarm problem. There was one voice in Troy that had been warning everyone for years, and no one ever listened. Priam's daughter, Cassandra, had the gift of true prophecy, and a curse that meant no one would ever believe her. She warned them the moment Paris brought Helen home. This would destroy the city. Nobody listened then. Nobody would listen later either. For 10 years, she watched every warning come true, one by one, and her worst warning was still ahead of her. Even after Hector fell, Troy wasn't finished. New champions arrived to take his place. An Amazon queen and her warriors joined the fight, cutting through the Greek ranks. It took Achilles himself to finally stop her. Next came a warrior king from a distant allied land, leading yet another wave of reinforcements. Once again, only Achilles could match him, and once again, Achilles won. Every champion Troy sent out, Achilles cut down. It just wouldn't be him for very much longer. Even without Hector, Troy still had one card left to play, and it involved the man who started all of this. Paris, more archer than warrior, took aim from a safe distance. Legend says there was exactly one place on Achilles' entire body that could be struck. His mother had dipped him in a magic river as a baby to make him invincible, but held him by the heel to do it. The greatest warrior of the war was killed by the one man he probably respected least. Even today, we still call a fatal weakness an Achilles heel. With both Hector and Achilles gone, the war had claimed its two greatest names. The Greeks even argued over who deserved Achilles' famous armor next, a dispute that ended badly for everyone involved. 10 years in, both sides exhausted, the walls hadn't moved an inch. While everyone else grieved or argued, Odysseus just kept thinking. And thinking was, historically, his most dangerous skill. You already know where this is going. The plan? Build a massive wooden horse and hide soldiers inside it. A soldier named Epeius, better known for carpentry than combat, was put in charge of actually building the thing. It took days to build, tall enough to hide dozens of armed men in its hollow belly. When it was finished, it towered over the entire camp. A hand-picked group of Greece's best warriors climbed inside and waited in total silence. Step 2. Convince Troy to bring it inside willingly. At dawn, the Trojans woke up to an empty sea. The Greek fleet was gone. After 10 years, it looked like the impossible had happened. Cautiously, the gates of Troy opened for the first time in years. All that remained on the beach was the massive wooden horse and total silence. One Greek soldier had been left behind on purpose, with a very convincing story to tell, and Troy was about to fall for every word of it. The soldier claimed the Greeks had given up and sailed home, and left the horse as an offering to the gods. Some Trojans wanted to celebrate, others weren't so sure. One priest warned them outright, don't trust gifts from enemies, especially ones this large. Moments later, a strange twist of fate silenced him for good, and the crowd took it as a sign. Cassandra screamed the loudest warning of her life. As always, no one believed her. They dragged their own downfall through the front gate. It took the whole city to move it. The horse barely fit through the gates. Some say they even had to tear down part of the wall just to get it inside. By nightfall, the very weapon meant to destroy Troy was sitting proudly in its main square. Not everyone celebrated. Some say Helen herself suspected something was wrong, but the city had waited 10 years for this moment, and it wasn't going to hold back. 10 years of tension, released in one very unwise party. Troy celebrated like the war was already won. 10 years of siege, undone in a single night of wine and celebration. Even the city's watchmen wandered down to join the party. For one night, Priam allowed himself to believe the nightmare was finally over. Eventually, even the loudest celebration runs out of steam, and that was exactly the moment they'd been waiting for. By midnight, all of Troy was asleep. No watch on the walls, no guards at the gates, nothing but silence. And in the middle of it all, the horse waited. Then, slowly, the hatch began to open. Odysseus checked the square, empty, silent, perfect. 10 years of war came down to this single moment. One by one, Greek soldiers climbed down from the horse's hollow belly, silent, fast, trained for exactly this moment. They split up, moving through the streets while Troy slept on. Their first target, the gates. For the first time in 10 years, the gates of Troy opened from the wrong side. And out at sea, that departed fleet had never actually gone far. The Greek ships had only sailed behind a nearby island, waiting for the signal. A torch lit high on the gatehouse, the signal to return. Within minutes, the full Greek army was storming back onto the shore. 10 years of siege was suddenly wide open. They didn't hesitate. They didn't wait for daylight. What happened next would end the city of Troy forever. Troy woke up to an army already inside its walls. Fires spread fast through a city built of wood and wine-soaked celebration. Even the palace wasn't safe. The fighting reached Priam's own doorstep. Families ran for the harbor, for the hills, for anywhere but here. The walls that held for 10 years hadn't fallen to any siege. They fell to one very good story. By morning, the city that inspired a decade of war no longer existed. Priam, too old to fight, took refuge at his own household altar. He had ruled Troy for decades. He watched it fall in a single night. The war that began with his son's choice ended, fittingly, with his own life. Even by the standards of an already brutal war, historians still call it one of the darker nights in the story. Troy's ruling family, the line that had governed the city for generations, was gone by dawn. He carried his elderly father on his back and led his young son by the hand through the burning city. Somehow, in all that chaos, they made it out. From a hilltop, they watched everything they knew disappear into smoke. According to later legend, Aeneas's journey away from Troy would eventually lead to the founding of an entirely different great civilization. Rome itself would one day claim him as its ancestor. That's a whole other story. Cassandra, whose warnings no one ever believed, was taken captive along with the other royal women, and Helen, the woman the entire war was fought over, finally stood face to face with the husband she'd left. Some versions of the story say he meant to kill her. Others say one look was enough to change his mind. Whatever happened between them, the stories agree. She went home to Sparta. The rest of Troy's survivors were divided up and taken across the Aegean as spoils of war. The war for Helen was finally over. The cost had been almost everything. Troy was gone, burned to the ground in a single night. The victors sailed home loaded with treasure and with a war's worth of grief. Odysseus, whose idea ended the war, still had the longest journey home ahead of him. Agamemnon sailed home a conqueror. He had no idea what was waiting for him there. And the story of Troy didn't end with the city. It just kept getting told. Some of those homecomings became just as legendary as the war itself. Agamemnon returned home to a wife who had spent 10 years planning her own kind of homecoming. Legend says he didn't survive his first night back. Ajax, who lost the argument over Achilles' armor, met a tragic end of his own. Nearly every hero of this story paid a steep price for their part in it. Victory and tragedy, it turns out, traveled together the entire way home. So, after all that, was any of it even real? Centuries after these events supposedly happened, a poet named Homer turned them into two of the most famous epics ever written. One covered the rage of Achilles during the war. The other followed Odysseus's long, chaotic journey home. These poems weren't written down for hundreds of years. They were memorized and performed out loud, generation after generation. Centuries later, a Roman poet picked up Aeneas's escape and turned it into Rome's own founding legend, and it never really stopped. Books, plays, films, games. Troy has been rebuilt and burned down again more times than anyone can count. Not bad in staying power for a fight that supposedly started over a party invitation. So how much of this actually happened the way the poems describe it? Historians doubt a real siege lasted a literal 10 years. Ancient storytellers loved round, dramatic numbers. Some scholars think the war may have actually been a mix of smaller conflicts over trade routes and territory, blended into one legendary story. Even the wooden horse has theories. Some think it might symbolize a siege engine, or an earthquake that breached the walls. The horse was actually a common symbol linked to that region long before this story, which might explain why it got woven in at all. Real war, real earthquake, real trade dispute, or just a really good ancient storyteller. Take your pick. Was Troy even a real place, or just a very good story? In the 1870s, an amateur archaeologist actually found ruins matching the city's description on the coast of modern Turkey. The site shows 9 different cities built one on top of another, one layer showing clear signs of war and fire. Whether that layer is the Troy of legend is still debated. The gods, the The Golden Apple, the 10-year war, almost certainly embellished. But a war, a city, and a fall. There may be real history buried under all that myth, which might be the most human part of the whole story. We've been turning real history into legends since the very beginning. This story is nearly 3,000 years old, so why do we still tell it? Because underneath the gods and monsters, it's a story about very human things. Pride, love, grief, and one terrible decision after another. Achilles' rage, Hector's duty, Priam's grief. None of that needed magic to feel real. And Odysseus's trick still shows up everywhere. Beware of Greeks bearing gifts became a saying for a reason. We still use his trick's name for computer viruses. And Achilles' one weak spot still describes anyone's biggest flaw. Not bad for a story that's been retold for 3,000 years. A stolen queen, a 10-year siege, a wooden horse. One of the oldest stories humans ever told, and we're still telling it. Love, pride, grief, and one very clever trick. That's the whole formula for a legend. So, was Troy real history, exaggerated myth, or a bit of both? Let me know what you think down below. And if you want more history that sounds too wild to be true, stick around. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.